They say she counts still, not days, nor seasons, nor years, but plates. 1, 2, 3, her voice rising like the wind through bamboo. By the time she reaches 9, the sound is sharp as broken porcelain. The 10th never comes. It is then that silence swells, and those who hear it swear they feel a hand cold, wet, and terribly patient brush their ankle. This is the oldest story of Himeji Castle that is not written in ink. It does not appear in the registers of the Tokugawa shogunate, nor in the meticulous records of its daimyo. It clings instead to the walls, the gardens, and most of all, the deep black well at the heart of the keep. And yet, like so many tales we keep in the archive, it is as much a record of the past as any official document. Welcome, then, to these white wings of stone and plaster, where truth and memory fold together like origami. I am the archivist, and tonight we walk the halls of Himeji, through the years when its keep stood at the peak of its power, and the nights when the faint sound of counting drew samurai from their beds. If you find yourself lingering here in these shadowed stories, I invite you to subscribe and return often. The archive is vast, and its doors open quietly. Himeji Castle rises like a bird, mid-flight Shirasagi J. The white Huron castle, its roofs layered in graceful tiers, each tile dark and gleaming against the white walls. Even now, it is hard to imagine it as a fortress. So perfect is its symmetry, so delicate the curve of its eaves. But in the early years of the 17th century, when the Tokugawa shogunate still drew the borders of its power, this beauty was a mask for its purpose. The man most responsible for its final formidable form was Ikeda Teramasa, a daimyo whose loyalty to Tokugawa Ieyasu had been rewarded with vast lands and the daunting task of refashioning Himeji into a citadel worthy of the new order. For 9 years, 1601 to 1609 stone rose upon stone, each brought from quarries and rivers, each placed by the calloused hands of laborers who came from villages miles away. The outer walls curved like great arms, designed not only to protect but to confuse. The maze-like approach to the central keep was an old military trick. Lead the enemy in, turn them round and round, and break them before they ever saw the heart of the fortress. But for those who lived within, the design was more than a matter of war. It was the shape of their daily lives. Servants hurried along narrow passages, their feet muffled on polished floors. Women of the samurai households embroidered by the light of paper windows, the steady murmur of their voices carrying down corridors. Guards patrolled the walls at dusk, their armor catching the last fire of the sun. And somewhere among them, though the records are silent, a maid named Okiku served. Her name does not appear in the castle's ledgers, for servants were many and often interchangeable in the eyes of their lords. We know her only because of what she became in the telling, the ghost by the well. But before she was that, before the voice and the counting, she was a living woman in a fortress newly crowned with white. The story says she was entrusted with a set of 10 precious plates, fine blue and white ceramics, perhaps from China, perhaps from Arita kilns in Kyushu. They were not merely dishes. They were symbols of refinement, of trade connections, of the wealth and taste of the lord who owned them. To lose one was to lose face, and to lose face in the court of a daimyo was to risk far more than dismissal. It is here that fact slips its hand into the sleeve of legend. The castle was, in Teramasa's time, a hive of rivalries. Though the Tokugawa order had been established after the bloody chaos of the Sengoku period, peace did not erase ambition. The vassals who served in Himeji were still men who had survived on cunning, alliance, and calculated loyalty. They watched each other for signs of weakness. If Okiku lost the plate, perhaps it was truly her mistake. Perhaps she misplaced it in the course of her duties, and the panic that followed was her own. But the other telling says this, that she was framed, that someone, whether out of jealousy, vengeance, or the cold precision of politics, hid the plate and accused her of its loss. The difference between the two versions is like the difference between moonlight and lantern light. One is cold and distant, the other close and deliberate. The punishment in both is the same. She is brought to the well in the castle courtyard, bound and thrown into its depths. The water closes over her with barely a ripple. It is worth noting here that the well is real. You can see it today, Okiku's well. They call it its rim worn smooth, the water below black and depthless. Guides will tell you it is haunted, and on quiet days you may see visitors lean over and listen, just in case they catch the whisper of numbers. In the early nights after her death, the servants told each other they heard her. The sound of her voice was not a scream, but a recitation slow, deliberate, almost tender. 1, 2, 3, up to 9. Never 10. Never the plate that was missing. The guards on the night watch would stop at the well's edge, lantern light trembling on the stones. One claimed to have seen her face just beneath the surface, pale as moonlit porcelain. Another swore she walked the corridors, her wet hair trailing along the floor. These accounts never reached the castle's official logs, but they passed quickly among the townspeople outside the walls, and from there into the ink of storytellers and the brush of kabuki playwrights. And here the archive must pause, for we have wandered deep into the myth before finishing the map of the truth. Himeji Castle in the 17th century was more than the stage for a ghost story. It was the seat of a political vision, the Tokugawa dream of a Japan unified under a single unbroken line of authority. Its garrison was not merely soldiers, but families, craftsmen, and servants bound together in the service of a lord. Every life within its walls was a thread in the weave of that ambition. Okiku's life and death were a thread too. Only hers was pulled loose, and in the centuries that followed, it unraveled into something else entirely. A story you could tell in the dark, a name you could whisper beside a well. The official histories will tell you what happened after Ikeda Teramasa's death in 1613. The castle passed to his heirs, the political tides shifted, and the keep continued to stand as a jewel of the Tokugawa realm. But the ghost story Okiku's counting did not fade with its first telling. If anything, it grew stronger with the years, like ivy finding deeper purchase in the cracks of stone. Some said the haunting was not simply vengeance, but loyalty turned bitter. Okiku, in life, had been devoted to her lord, or so the whispers went, and had uncovered some treachery in the castle. The stolen plate, in this version, was the bait to draw her into accusation. By silencing her, the traitors secured their position. But a loyal spirit, they claimed, does not rest. And so she lingered, keeping watch in her own strange way, counting the plates that no one could take from her now. Others, more superstitious still, spoke of her spirit as bound to the well by the force of its own despair. Water spirits in Japanese folklore are not gentle. They pull at the living, seeking company. The belief that grief or rage could tether the dead to a place was as old as the oldest shrines, and here was a perfect example, visible, audible, and utterly unexplainable. By the mid-17th century, the story of Okiku had crossed the castle walls entirely. It reached Kyoto, where theater troupes embroidered it with tragedy and romance. In the hands of kabuki and banraku playwrights, Okiku was not just a servant, but a woman of striking beauty, caught in the web of a cruel samurai's lust. In these versions, the broken plate was merely the excuse. Her rejection of the Lord's advances was the true cause of her death. And here we see the myth bending to the needs of its audience. The moral shifts depending on the telling. In some, it is a caution against negligence. In others, a warning about the abuse of power. In still others, it is a lament for unrequited love. In every version, however, the act of counting the slow, inevitable approach to 9 remains. That is the fixed star in her constellation. It is tempting, from the distance of centuries, to imagine the daily life of Himeji's court as a steady, unbroken pageant of order. Yet beneath the white walls, there was tension. The Tokugawa system demanded stability, but that stability was maintained by keeping powerful lords under watch. Their resources limited, their movements controlled. Marriages were arranged to bind rivals, and hostages, often the children of the daimyo, were sent to Edo to ensure loyalty. Within this world, every servant was more than they appeared. A maid might carry messages, overhear secrets, or be used as an unknowing pawn. Okiku's position placed her in the private chambers, close to the women of the household spaces where men of power could not tread openly. If she heard something she should not have, or if her loyalty was questioned, there would have been no shortage of ways to remove her without leaving a trace in the official records. In the years after her death, the well itself began to change in the minds of those who lived near it. People avoided it after sunset. Offerings of flowers and food appeared at its rim, left by those who feared her wrath or sought her help. Water drawn from it for tea was said to taste faintly of salt, as though the sea had claimed it. During the winter months, when the castle walls held the cold like a breath, some claimed to see frost form in patterns concentric circles, like ripples from a stone cast into water around the well's mouth. These little details never appear in the court chronicles, but they survive in letters from townspeople to relatives in distant provinces, in the marginal notes of travelers' diaries, in the strange asides of old maps where the well is marked with a tiny, ominous dot. Meanwhile, Himeji Castle stood untouched by war. The Tokugawa era was long and largely peaceful, but peace did not erase the shadow of violence. It only displaced it. From the battlefield to the drawing room, from open combat to quiet acts behind closed doors. It was in such a climate that stories like Okiku's thrived. They gave form to the unease people felt but could not name, and they allowed the safe retelling of power's cruelty without accusing any living soul. By the 18th century, Okiku's ghost had become part of the larger tapestry of Japanese yurei lore, the pale, robed women with long black hair that haunt plays, paintings, and poetry. In these later tellings, she is given the white burial kimono, her hair unbound in death, her form hovering just above the ground as she glides through the corridors of the castle. The storytellers never forgot to place her by the well, but now she could appear anywhere counting in the ear of the sleeping guard, or beside the paper lantern of a late working scribe. The real castle, however, remained a place of duty. The daimyo came and went, each leaving some small mark upon the fortress, a repaired gate, a replastered wall, a new crest on the banners. In the archives of the Ikeda and Sakai families, the name Okiku does not appear once. Yet in the popular imagination, she had become inseparable from the White Heron. You could not speak of Himeji without at least a passing mention of the well. It is here that the threads of fact and myth are almost impossible to separate. Did a woman named Okiku truly serve here? Almost certainly. Himeji would have had dozens of maids over the decades, many of whom left no record. Did she lose, or was she accused of losing a precious plate? Such an incident could have happened 100 times in different castles, but here it stuck. Did she die in that well? The stones are silent, but that silence is the soil in which the story grew. And as the centuries turned, that soil deepened. Japan would change, its castles fall into disrepair, its samurai fade into history, but Himeji endured. And always, at the heart of it, the voice in the well. 1, 2, 3. By the dawn of the 19th century, Japan stood on the brink of change it could not yet see, and Himeji Castle, like all relics of the Tokugawa order, was caught between preservation and obsolescence. The shogunate's grip was weakening, but its rituals and symbols endured, and the White Heron remained a proud outpost of that fading power. The lords who governed here no longer expected to defend its walls against siege, but they maintained the garrison, drilled the men, and kept the castle's appearance immaculate. It was in this time, in the quiet decades before the Meiji Restoration, that Okiku's story reached one of its most haunting and influential forms. In 1824, playwrights took her tale from the street storytellers and molded it into Bancho Sarayashig, a kabuki drama that would carry her name far beyond Himeji. Though the play was set in Edo, the heart of it was still the same. A servant woman wronged, a plate broken or stolen, a well, and the endless counting to 9. On stage, she became not just a ghost, but the very embodiment of betrayal's wound. The actors' white-painted faces, their long black wigs, their slow, deliberate movements all conspired to create a figure at once beautiful and unbearable to behold. The sound of counting became the drumbeat of the scene, each number pulling the audience closer to the moment when the missing 10th plate and the missing justice would never arrive. Theater critics of the day noted how the audience responded not with shouts or laughter, as was often the case in kabuki, but with an eerie stillness. Some whispered that this was because the spirit of the real Okiku was watching from the wings, drawn by the sound of her own story. The more pragmatic explained it differently. The scene was too perfect, too close to the kind of injustice people feared, but could not protest in life. In the theater, they could weep for her safely. Meanwhile, in the real Himeji, the well remained untouched. The castle town had grown around the fortress, its streets bending in harmony with the defensive walls. Merchants, artisans, and farmers lived in the shadow of the keep, their livelihoods tied to the daimyo's household. Children dared each other to lean over the well's rim at dusk to see if the water would stir. Old women warned them not to listen too long, lest they begin to count along with her and be unable to stop. It is in these years that the story takes on its most superstitious turn. Some accounts claim that those who counted past 9 reaching the forbidden's 10th would invite catastrophe upon themselves or their family. The punishment was never specified, but that vagueness was part of the terror. Better not to try at all. Even the samurai, bound by their code of stoicism, began to acknowledge the ghost in small ways. A guard post near the well was informally reassigned. Men claimed it was simply too damp, but in their off-duty talk, the truth came out. They disliked standing there in the dead of night, when the wind through the stone mouth of the well sometimes seemed to form syllables. And yet, for all its growing reputation as a place of haunting, Himeji Castle continued to serve its practical functions. Records from the period show detailed inventories of arms, armor, and food stores. Taxes collected from the surrounding lands flowed into the coffers, and the daimyo maintained their obligations to Edo. The contrast between the daily routine's mundane, bureaucratic, and the story of the ghost made the latter all the more compelling. When Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853, demanding Japan open its ports, the old world of the Tokugawa began to crumble. The Daoshin War followed, and in its wake came the Meiji Restoration. The emperor restored to power, the samurai class abolished, the feudal system dismantled. Many castles were abandoned, sold, or demolished, their stones carted away for modern buildings. Himeji could have been among them. Yet somehow, the White Heron survived the storm. Its walls were spared, though it was briefly repurposed for military use by the new imperial army. The old daimyo's residence became officers' quarters. The banners changed, but the corridors remained, and so too did the well. It was in these early Meiji years, when so much of Japan's past was being swept away, that Okiku's legend gained a strange new significance. For a people watching the symbols of their old life vanish, the ghost was an anchor. She had been there before the Restoration, before Perry, before the shogunate itself began to falter. She was a reminder that not everything could be erased by decree. Visitors came to Himeji not for its new military function, but for the old story. Travelers' diaries from the 1870s described the castle as haunted, and one English visitor wrote of hearing a faint and persistent recitation, as of a woman counting her possessions while touring the grounds. Whether he truly heard it or merely repeated what his guide told him, the effect was the same. The story had crossed the boundary from national to global curiosity. And so the well and the woman in it endured. It is worth pausing here to notice the shape of her myth. Many ghost stories diminish over time, their details fading. Okiku's did the opposite. The core remained, but the surrounding shadows deepened. Each generation added a nuance, a political intrigue here, a romantic betrayal there. Each retelling polished the image of her as a tragic emblem of injustice, until she was less a person than an eternal presence. In the real world, her bones, if ever they were in that well, would long since have dissolved. But in the archive, in the whispers of visitors, in the darkened theaters where her story is performed even now, she remains untouched. And at night, when the corridors of the White Heron fall silent, those who pass the well say they sometimes hear it still. 1, 2, 3. By the 20th century, Himeji Castle had outlived the era that built it, the feudal lords who ruled it, and the political system it once symbolized. The Meiji government, recognizing its historical value, declared it a national treasure in 1931. Yet the castle did not simply become a static monument. It continued to breathe in the minds of those who came to walk its halls. The Second World War brought fire to many Japanese cities, and countless castles were lost to bombs and neglect. Himeji itself was targeted, the surrounding town reduced to smoking ruins in the air raids of 1945. Yet, almost miraculously, the White Heron remained untouched. Bombs fell nearby, but the walls and eaves survived without a single direct hit. The people of Himeji whispered that Okiku had protected it, that the ghost, tied to the castle by the injustice of her death, had stood sentinel through the storm of war. After the war, as Japan rebuilt, the ghost story began to change once more. Modernity had arrived. Neon lights, trains, factories, and the hum of electricity replaced the rustle of silk and the clatter of wooden geta on stone. Yet in the quiet spaces between, Okiku was still there. Schoolchildren told her tale to each other at sleepovers. Young couples visiting the castle on dates would stop at the well, daring one another to lean close, just in case. The 1960s brought a massive restoration effort, scaffolding wrapping the keep like a cocoon. Workers reported strange incident stools misplaced, faint splashes from the well when no one was near, and on windless days, the sound of water lapping as though something moved beneath the surface. One man claimed that while working alone in the evening, he heard a voice counting in the empty courtyard. He left his tools where they lay and refused to return after dark. Even in an age of skepticism, the story found ways to endure. The rise of television and film carried Okiku's ghost far beyond Hyogo Prefecture. She appeared in horror anthologies, reimagined in the visual language of the times, sometimes with a modern dress, sometimes as the classic yurei with long, unbound hair. In the late 20th century, as G-horror began to captivate audiences, she became part of the cultural DNA that gave rise to films like Ringu and Ju-on. The Well, The Counting, The Pale Figure, these were her bequest to the genre. And yet, for all the fiction she has inspired, the real Himeji Castle remains a place of extraordinary quiet. The keep stands as it has for 4 centuries, its white walls gleaming under the sun, its shadow falling over the same stone paths that Okiku once walked if she truly lived. Tourists climb the steep stairs, moving from level to level, each floor narrower than the last, until they stand in the highest room, where the wind whistles through open shutters and the view stretches to the sea. Down below, tucked away in the western bailey, the well waits. Okiku's well is not grand. Its stone rim is low, its wooden cover plain. A small sign gives her name and a brief summary of the legend, but the deeper history, the labyrinth of court intrigue, the political machinery of the Tokugawa state, the changing uses of the castle through the centuries is absent. Perhaps that is fitting. The well is not a place of facts. It is a place of echoes. I stood there once, reading the inscription, the sound of the wind in the pines above. Around me, visitors came and went, their voices low as though in a temple. A young boy crept to the edge and leaned over, peering into the dark. 1, 2, 3, he began, and his mother pulled him back before he reached 9. It struck me then that Okiku's story is not really about the plates, nor even about her death. It is about the persistence of the small against the great. Himeji Castle was built to last, a monument to the ambitions of men whose names fill the chronicles. Yet the name most often spoken within its walls belongs to a servant girl who does not appear in those records. She did not command armies or sway politics, and yet she is remembered, not for victory or conquest, but for a voice that refuses to stop. 1, 2, 3. The line between history and myth is never straight. It bends, it folds, it doubles back on itself. We cannot say where the real Okiku ends and the ghost begins, only that somewhere in the shadow of those white walls they meet. The castle endures. The voice endures. And as long as people lean over the rim of the well, straining to hear the count, she will endure too. In the archive, we keep such stories because they remind us that the past is not just what happened, it is what we choose to remember, and how we choose to tell it. In the end, the white heron may be the body, but Okiku is its restless heart. And if, someday, you walk those halls yourself, and find your path leading to a quiet courtyard where a low stone well waits, you might find yourself listening just for a moment. 1, 2, 3. Never 10.